The Rebel Capitalist Show. Okay, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome someone back to the Rebel Capitalist Show. He is my good buddy. I just spoke at his amazing conference a couple weeks ago, and he's going to speak at Rebel Capitalist Live in Houston, January 7th through the 9th. So if you haven't got your tickets, make sure you go to rebelcapitalistlive.com and get them right away. He needs no introduction. His name is Mark Moss. Mark, welcome back to the Rebel Capitalist Show, my friend.
Thanks so much, George. Man, always a pleasure to talk to you. I love hanging out with you and talking to you. So I'm excited to be back on the show. I'm excited about the Rebel Capitalist event. I mean, am I going to share a stage with Ron Paul? Like, is that real?
Yeah, that's right. Ron Paul and Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, and Richard Warner, which is going to be, that's going to be really cool. My assistant just got off the phone with his assistant setting up the flight and whatnot. So I was a little worried there initially having him come in from the UK with all of the restrictions and whatnot, but I think we've got it ironed out. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm super excited, super excited to share a message with Ron Paul, who obviously influenced both of us a lot with his in the Fed campaign. And I'm working on something really big to bring out at the event. It's going to be really, really good. So everybody should show up.
Well, last time you talked about these long-term cycles where we go from moving towards centralization, then moving towards decentralization. And it's very similar to like a fourth turning type of cycle or Ray Dalio's long-term debt cycles. So, but now you've been on top of that, you've been kind of layering over these geopolitical cycles or what we're seeing right now, and then comparing that to what's happening in the energy space, or adding that to what's happening in the energy space to try to predict what we might see next in markets and in society. So hopefully I've got that right. If so, can you expand on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of talked about it. That was when I first started really building this thesis out at your last event, which was these three revolutionary cycles that are converging. And so you mentioned two of them, the fourth turning, that's like a political cycle. That's an 80-year cycle. And then Ray Dalio's credit cycle is an 80-year cycle. So there's like a credit cycle, an 80-year cycle. There's a technological revolution cycle that's 50 years. And there's a political revolution cycle that's 250 years. So those are all converging right now. But then how do we use that lens to then project where things go into the future? And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about. But I think back to kind of the question that you framed up, which is energy crisis, supply chain crisis. That's all a sign of the times, like this peak centralization and kind of like what Ayn Rand wrote about in Atlas Shrugged. I mean, the whole world, the economy is just breaking down at this point.
Yeah. And I've actually talked about this quite a bit on Twitter over the weekend, but I had a conversation with Jeff Snider on Friday.
Yeah.
And he discussed the Eurodollar futures curve, which I haven't really paid much attention to, but he, Jeff obviously knows economic history and monetary history better than anyone on the planet Earth. Yeah. And he says that it's actually more precise than the yield curve on the treasury market. Excuse me. And the Eurodollar's future curve inverted last week, which means that that's telling you that most likely global economic output will decrease significantly over the next, let's say, 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that kind of dovetails on exactly what you're saying, and that we're seeing the supply chain breakdown. We're seeing energy just skyrocket in price. I just had a tweet. Some kid DM'd me from, I believe it was Finland this morning, saying that his energy costs have gone up 15 times.
Yeah.
15 times. I mean, maybe he's talking about natural gas. I'm not sure. But this is where we just get this breakdown of society and a breakdown of the economy, which you said you've experienced recently in your own life.
Yeah, I was telling you a story of when we were at my event in Miami, whatever that was, 3-4 weeks ago, trying to fly back to Miami. And I've been flying a lot. I mean, the last year I've traveled once or twice a month, which is kind of a lot for me. And I'm just starting to see that planes are breaking down, delays are happening, bags aren't showing up, things like that. And anyway, so I was flying home and I was supposed to get home at 10 o'clock at night. My plane got delayed, sat on the runway for 2 hours, had to get towed back in. They had to get another plane. By the time I got another plane, the crew timed out, had to get a different crew. I didn't get home till 5 a.m. And my kids were like getting really frustrated. And I said, hey, I want you to pay attention to what is happening, why this is happening. Notice how this didn't used to happen. This is a sign of society breaking down. I want you to pay attention. So we're kind of going through this historical moment in time. I think history books will be written, like I study history, and I know you do as well. And there's key pieces, there's key points in time that signal these big changes. And I think this is one of those times. Another antidote to that story was last night. I was flying home from Miami again, back to Puerto Rico. And again, an hour late taking off, missed my connection, had to drive 4 hours to get home. It was like, and so this is just a sign, I think. But what's interesting about this is that not only are we seeing society breaking down for any number of reasons, it's also being like, I feel like there's like a controlled demolition that's happening as well, because, obviously we have the economy side, the economics, the monetary expansion, which I believe is the cause of most of this. You always say high prices are the cure for high prices. You recite that a lot, but high prices aren't curing high prices right now.
Yeah,
right?
Well, they can't. If the government distorts the economy or restricts the ability for entrepreneurs to create more supply, then that doesn't work.
Exactly. So we have those policies, that's monetary, but then we also have these political factors, which is they're shutting down oil pipelines, right? They're shutting down natural gas pipelines, and it's redrawing the political. So kind of looking out of a longer lens. When you go back, I think a lot of people look at like politics or economics to see how the future is going to be changed. But really, when we look back, there's like these hidden forces, these boundaries, and it's really when the power structures change. So when the power structures change throughout history, that's what creates these big shifts. And so typically technology has had these massive power structure shifts. So for example, in the 1500s, the church and the state had a control over the people, and they had a control over the information, but the printing press decentralized information, which changed the power structure and then changed the whole world. We can look back in the feudal system, the medieval system, we had the knights, and the knights with armor on a horse were the top military, strategy at the time, but then a gun came out and that was over and it changed the power structure. And so what's interesting in Europe, back to the energy crisis, is they have all this energy they could get if they wanted. They're sitting on massive amounts of natural gas, but they're deciding to rely 100% on Russia. Right.
Just a virtue signal.
Yeah, well, it's virtue signal on their part, but they're literally getting all their natural gas out of Russia now. So what does that do to the power structure of what's happening in Europe? And I think it's going to have massive implications. But back to the kind of the point of this controlled demolition. So we have this monetary expansion policy that's creating all these problems. And then we have these political, problems they're putting on top of it, which is, mandates, forcing people out of their jobs. So we don't have the manpower going on, shutting down energy, and it's just compounding, and it's escalating pretty rapidly.
You see what New York did today, or de Blasio?
I saw something about, all private businesses, I think, in New York City have to have a mandate now. Yeah.
Every single employee, if you work in New York City, you have to have the medicine, or else you're fired. And not only that, but he's extending the medicine passports to kids 5 to 11. So they can't even get into a restaurant now unless your 5-year-old shows his papers. I mean, that's where we are in New York City right now.
After I just got back from Miami. I was in Florida for the last week. There's no pandemic. It was Art Basel week. So there was art exhibits happening all over town. It was packed. I mean, just going from party to party to party, jam-packed, shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. There's no pandemic. And everyone's living normal. And it's crazy to think that some states like that are still living in full fear, full pandemic. It doesn't really make sense to me.
How was your trip to El Salvador? Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because most people know what's going on down there. If not, maybe you can just give a quick summary. And
so
then,
what's happening in El Salvador is part of my thesis into what happens in the future. I believe that we'll see the end of the giant nation state, and we'll start to see a lot smaller states pop up.
yeah,
And El Salvador is a good example of what's happening. So, and also I'm in Puerto Rico right now. Puerto Rico is also a good example of that. And so I believe kind of going back to medieval times, when the troops were moving around, there was these march zones in countries, and it was where countries overlapped, and they had these march zones, and people in those areas could decide which laws they wanted to abide by based off of what government or what kingdom they were from, even though they were in one geographic area. And so I believe we're seeing a return of that, where the same people, but in the same geographic area, can abide by two different sets of laws. So in Puerto Rico, for example, I'm here on an Act 60. My entire legal structure, tax structure is different than most people here, even though we're in the same geographic area. And I believe we'll continue to see that. El Salvador is another good example of that, where we'll have this increased competition. So El Salvador has said, hey, we're going to have a new medium of exchange. We're going to allow Bitcoin to be a medium of exchange. And obviously I'm a big Bitcoiner. What happens, I believe, is once you start kind of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, as we say, you start to look at the world differently. You start to have a more, I guess, freedom mindset, a longer time preference. And I think the president of El Salvador has been bitten by the Bitcoin bug, or he's just listening to other Bitcoin proponents, because he decided to make it legal tender. We know that was in September 7th. Since that time, he rolled out a Bitcoin wallet and gave $30 of Bitcoin out to everybody. That's since doubled since that happened. But what's happened since then is what's getting, I think, even more interesting. So now, as of a few weeks ago, he listened to the people in Bitcoin Plus, I think his freedom mindset, and he said, no more mandates, no more testing, no more requirements. If you want the medicine, great, take it. We offer it to you for free. 70% of the people have taken it. That's cool. If you don't want it, no big deal. We're not testing anybody. We're not forcing anybody. And in addition, he just released what's called Bitcoin City, where he's having basically said no income taxes, no property taxes, no cap gains taxes. And he said, everybody come and make as much money as you want.
Is that in a specific area or the entire country?
Well, it's in this Bitcoin City, which is a specific area.
So it's kind of like a free trade zone.
A free trade zone. So back to my thesis, which is the same people living in the same geographic region could be under two different jurisdictions or two different types of laws, if you will. And so free trade zones are exactly perfect analogies for that, or examples of that. And so basically he's created this area, said, everybody come, and it creates this competition loop. And then one other thing that he's done that's amazing is he's launched this Bitcoin bond. So he has a $1 billion bond, which the El Salvador bonds, they go at about 13.5% right now. He's only given it at 6.5%. He's offering to take half of that bond, 500 billion, and use it to build out Bitcoin mining along the volcano.
500 million, yeah.
Which we can talk about. And then the other 500 is going to go to building out the infrastructure of the city. What they're also doing is they're going to have a 5-year holding period on the bond, and then they'll start to sell some of the Bitcoin in order to pay additional yield on the bond. And the way they've mapped it out, which I think is a little bit aggressive, but they think the bond could end up paying about 150% when it's fully paid out. And I think this is going to be a massive success. The reason why I say that is Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy, he famously last year put their entire treasury, $500 million, into Bitcoin. Since then, he went on to raise, I think, 3 rounds of debt to buy Bitcoin. Each one of them was oversubscribed. He raised $1.5 billion for that. In the last 2 months, we've seen, I think, 6 different publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies raise debt to buy Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining equipment. And so we've seen 6 or 7 examples of oversubscription, of massive success. I think this $1 billion is going to get taken very quickly. But what happens when a nation state can raise $1 billion in the private market and doesn't need to rely on the IMF?
Yeah. How do you see interest rates increasing, playing into that?
Well, interest rates in what?
Basically,
what
the price of Bitcoin, because the price of Bitcoin is what we're talking about with Saylor and what we're talking about with this gentleman in El Salvador. As an example, if interest rates go to 20%, then there's going to be some risk assets are going to struggle. And also going back to the Eurodollar futures curve, if we do have a stock market crash, then people are going to sell anything they can sell, so because they need the liquidity. Usually that's gold in the short term if we go back to the GFC. But now a lot more of those balance sheets with those hedge funds that need liquidity have Bitcoin instead of gold.
Yeah.
So is there a risk there to the price if interest rates increase or we see lower economic activity globally, a recession, maybe a stock market crash?
Yeah. So first of all, rates are coming down. So they're paying 13.5% now, and now they're going to pay 6.5% on the bond. So rates are actually coming down, I think, based off the Bitcoin bond. But back to the bigger question, as far as it being a risk-off asset and selling off like gold typically would, it hasn't been around long enough to really know. But I like to look at what happened to gold in 2008. So the stock market dropped about almost 60%. Gold dropped about 25%. Yeah. But the gold reclaimed its previous high in about 7 months. And then went on to go from a low of 680 to almost 2000, whereas the stock market took 7 years to recapture its all-time high. And then we can look at March 2020, same thing, gold dipped, but this time we had Bitcoin. Bitcoin obviously took a massive dip as well, about a 50% drop. But without any circuit breakers, without a plunge protection team, it managed to come back and again, shoot to new crazy all-time highs. So it was about, I forget now, $6,000, $7,000 dropped down to about $3,500. And then of course went on to $68,000. So just like gold did in 2008, just like we saw in March 2020, I would expect probably the same thing to happen. Yep. Because it's not so much about the crash, it's the government's response to the crash.
Yep.
If the markets drop 20%, which a lot of people think, or even bigger, 60, 80%, I mean, we'll see money printing probably at a level that we've never seen before. And so there's initial knee-jerk reaction. I think trying to trade that dip would be very difficult. And then I would imagine it would just take off to new all-time highs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So now going down my list here, we were in Miami at your event, and we were doing a panel discussion with Pompliano and Mike Dillard.
Yep.
And, he said something very fascinating to me. He said that the future is going to be dictated, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might have been getting his words wrong, but I think he said the future is going to be dictated by memes. And initially you think about that, and you're like, what? Okay, I get the memes, they're influential. People retweet them and share them a lot, but is the future, I mean, that's a pretty big statement. And then you go back and look at history, and you look at the Revolutionary War. Yeah. And prior to that, and you look at a gentleman by the name of Paul Revere.
Yeah.
And what we had is the Boston Massacre. And Paul Revere did, at the time, I think that it was an imprint, but it was basically this picture of what happened just quickly, almost like a cartoon of this, horrible experience there at the Boston Massacre. And that went kind of viral for the day, if you will. That went out to every one of the colonies. Everyone had that picture that Paul Revere drew of the Boston Massacre, and that really influenced the thinking of the 13 colonies at the time as far as their attitude towards Britain. That's a meme.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I also say the same thing. I think that the war of the future isn't fought over guns. It's fought over information and money. That's the war of the future. And we have the memes and we got the Bitcoin. So I say something similar. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about these mega political things. And it's really about when there's a transfer in power, in the power structure. So today you have the brand new US aircraft carrier was $13 billion. They're normally $3 to $5 billion. The new one's $13 billion. That's old school warfare. Today, a $2 million missile could take out that $13 billion aircraft carrier. Like, what are they doing still rolling those things out anymore? The power structure has changed. Just back to the medieval knight on the horse was the dominant, player in that military at the time. But then as soon as a gun came, I could easily just kill him, or, I could shoot a bow and arrow right between the right in the opening. And so when you have these power structures change, and so that $13 billion aircraft carrier isn't what it used to be. It's not that important. So I think it goes back to information and money. and information is meme. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? A video is worth even more, but that meme, it holds so much information. The Paul Revere example is great. We saw it all through when Stalin took over Russia. They used it. And even in World War II, you know, we had the posters, you know, Uncle Sam wants you to buy war bonds. So we can see all throughout history that those kind of memes have been used. Another thing that there's this awesome channel, I think I might have told you about it. I don't know who the guy's behind it, but it's called Academy of Ideas on YouTube. Oh, yeah. And he talks a lot about, you should check out some videos, but he talks a lot about how the USSR fell and how the authors, Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelagos, and how it was through their writings that it is what caused the downfall of the USSR by opening people's minds, a lot of what you and I are really trying to do. But he talked about specifically, it was the humor that was thrown out against the leaders that really shifted the power balance, because they were kind of making fun of them, right? Kind of like what JP Sears does.
I was just going to say JP Sears. We talked about him at dinner the other night with Mike Dillard and Kiyosaki and Kenny. Yeah.
Yeah. He's become a good friend. We're starting to do quite a bit of stuff together. We're doing a thing on Thursday night together, actually. But anyway, it's so using those memes, that information, and then having that humor in there, which a lot of the memes do, are super effective because it pierces that veil and it gets people to look at things more critically. So yeah, I agree with Pompliano. I think meme warfare.
Yeah, I wish, but it's right now, these memes are just, this is probably a stupid question, but these memes are just really decentralized to the point where people just, you know, all these people on Twitter, they see something like, let's go Brandon. And then they turn it into a meme, then it's a t-shirt, and it just kind of happens organically. I don't, are there people that are actually intentionally creating these memes and throwing them out there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I know, I mean, there's a couple of people that I know of on Twitter. That's all they do is just put memes out, and
really
different companies will hire them to do different memes for them and stuff. But there's guys that all they do is just make memes intentionally. A lot of them are probably more organic and they probably just go viral. But to your point, yeah, there are people that are doing it intentionally. But I think, I think that they've been proven to be very effective. And memes and Bitcoin, that's the future. That's the future of battle.
Yeah.
Well, information and money. And what's funny is, I don't know if you've seen, but people on the other side, like on the left side of the aisle, have tried to throw out a couple memes recently, and like, they're no good. They're not funny. They can't use them properly, you know, like they just don't have it. And I think a lot of it is, I mean, this is going deep. I don't know. I don't have any data to back this up, but if you study, you know, Marxism or communism, one of many reasons why it will never work, it can't ever work, is because when you censor what people can think and talk and say, it kills their creativity, right? That's why China was never able to be creative. They were never able to invent anything. They've had to steal all the IP. And it's because that creativity, when you censor all that thought, and I think it's that same thing that kills their creativity that prevents them from making good memes, right? They just don't.
That is actually an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't have any data on that, but I mean, that's what I believe about communism and why China isn't able to compete. But like I said, seeing them try to throw out some memes lately, and they're just like falling flat. They're just not good.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely not data driven, but maybe.
Hey, one thing I wanted to get your opinion on is, and along the same lines here, is YouTube getting rid of the count number on the dislike button. I mean, this is something that really, really irritates me. I mean, this is a huge deal, in my opinion. I think for the average YouTube watcher, it's like, whatever, you know, it's just another thing with their algorithm. But I see where this is headed, and I understand why they're doing it, because both of us at one point in time were very, quote unquote, small creators.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you heard their rationale, but they said they're doing it so small creators don't get bullied or something like that. And I'm like, no. That's your only edge as a small creator, is if you've got a better like ratio than one of these bigger channels with a similar video. Well, what are your thoughts on what YouTube is doing there?
Yeah, all of this just continues to build the case for my thesis, which is we're kind of at this peak centralization, and the world is starting to break down for a lot of reasons. There's moral decay, but to your point, I mean, I think one, I think it's horrible. To your point, two, on every single one of my videos, I sign off by saying, you know, please give me a thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. I'm okay, but leave me a comment. Like that's my closing line. So I ask for thumbs down if they want to do it. Without a feedback loop, without positive feedback, how could we ever improve or change? So of course we have to have that. I think ultimately the motivation is because these Brandon videos have been getting, you know, 20,000 down likes with 2 or 3, you know, positive likes.
It's Joe Biden comes out with a video and it just gets horrible like ratio. Same thing with MSNBC, CNN, World Economic Forum, IMF,
or any of those.
Right.
Yeah.
So the average viewer isn't going to be able to tell that this is a horrible video. Right. They're just going to go ahead and watch it where they otherwise would not have done so. So it's funneling people into that narrative.
Yeah, I've seen kind of the same thing. Not that they've taken this measure, but some of the things on was it IMDb? I don't watch a lot of movies, but like these new Fauci movies come out, and like the critics give it like a 99% approval rating, and then the crowd is like a 99% disapproval rating. Yeah. So you're kind of seeing this big difference between like the paid critics versus what the public is saying. And so, yeah, it's more censorship in my opinion. Right. So, I love this quote that ripping out a man's tongue does not prove him wrong. It only proves you have something to hide. And so I just think about that, right? It's just more censorship. It's more trying to push that narrative. It's bad, in my opinion. I'm not happy about it.
Well, I think it leads to more divisiveness. And also, you know, Mark, I was going through and trying to do my best to understand how someone that is for a mandate, how they think, just trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here.
Right.
So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And so if you bear with me for just a moment here, I'm going to go to Twitter because I tweet a lot of times. I tweet things out just so I remember them. Just FYI, viewers, if you follow me on Twitter, that's what I often do. Just because if I've got something on my mind, I tweet it out so I remember it.
Yeah.
But here was what the tweet was. Imagine there was I guess we'll take our chances with YouTube here. Imagine there was a virus that had a 50% probability of hospitalization. Then imagine taking one Advil would make it impossible for you to go to the hospital or spread the virus if contracted, thus eradicating the virus. If you think about it, this is the version of the cerveza sickness and the medicine that CNN and the mainstream media are jamming down the throats of the average viewer that doesn't know any better.
Yeah.
So if you thought that the cerveza sickness was that bad, that there was a 50% hospitalization rate, and you thought the medicine was just like taking an Advil, as far as the downside, and you thought that it would eradicate the entire virus because it's no longer transmittable and it's no longer possible to go to the hospital or have a severe outcome, then you could see in someone who doesn't know history, and then someone who also assumes that there's no problem whatsoever giving the government additional authority, control, power. Yeah. You could see how they would say, yeah, a mandate that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've seen some studies and some numbers, and it's been apparent just between red states and blue states, obviously, but where you get your news is definitely, you know, whether you're still in a pandemic or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And so there's definitely that. And to your point, I mean, they've completely misled things. And what they've done is they've changed the meaning of all the words. I mean, what do words even mean? I mean, what are guys? What are girls? What are men? What are women? What's up? What's down? What's two? Like, what are numbers? Like they're trying to kind of get rid of all of that, which again is a sign of the times, like this breakdown in morality. But to that, I mean, they've purposely co-opted the word, you know, wax, you know, we won't say the rest, right? But but they're calling this that. So a lot of people are like, well, what's the big deal? We've been doing it forever, and we always have to do it to go to school. And it's like, it's not the same thing, right?
Yeah, something that lasts 2 months. or 6 months is not using the term appropriately.
Right. So they've co-opted that word. And so people are like, oh yeah, what's the big deal? We've already done it, but they haven't bothered to take the time to look past that. But the piece that I think you're asking about, which I don't really understand either, is that we have all these little mini authoritarians where all of these people are so quick to be willing to tell you what you have to do, as opposed to just trying to make the change in their own lives. And so that, I think, is maybe what you're asking about. And that has been totally shocking for me to see how many people are ready to, again, take away your freedoms if you don't comply. And again, it's a sign of the time. So if you look back at Stalin's Russia or Hitler's Germany or Mao's China,
right,
the military takes such a small percentage of the population. They can't achieve their goal unless they can get the people to turn on each other. And so they've always had to do that. And so they create that problem. But yeah, I've been shocked. I mean, the amount of many authoritarians is insane.
Because it's become a religion. I think that's obvious, but that means that it's going to get more and more divisive. So how do we have a soft landing from a standpoint of society? And what I mean is, I discussed this with Neil Howe, and he says at the end of every fourth turning in the United States, you had war. And I said, okay, so we're at the end of a fourth turning now. Does that mean that this has to end in war? And he said, well, I can't predict the future to that extent. I can just tell you that every single time in the past, that's been the result.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily, right? I mean,
but how does that, if that divisiveness continues to get worse, which I think it will, on top of people getting pissed off because they can no longer afford to put food on the table. They no longer can afford rent. They no longer can afford these energy prices. When you combine those things all together, this powder keg, how can we avoid that war scenario? How can we have a soft landing where people wake up to this insanity and we get off this road to serfdom and kind of back on the road to freedom and liberty?
Well, the problem is the more people that wake up, the more likely we are headed to war, right? Because we have more and more people waking up and doing that. I think, and speaking of war, just on a geopolitical level, I mean, we're rapidly moving towards war, both in the Ukraine with Russia and Taiwan and with China right now.
Right.
I mean, this is like escalating at a rapid rate. I mean, Russia's got all their troops along the Ukraine border. They look like they're not going to back down. And we have China with Taiwan flying their warships over, or moving their warships by and flying their planes across. It almost looks like they're both signaling to each other, like, let's move at the same time. If we both do it at the same time, what's the US going to do? They know that we have an inept leader. And that's what a lot of people that I've been talking to that are really paying attention to this think is going to happen. And that would be war, in these two other countries.
How dependent, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, how dependent is Western Europe right now on the energy coming in from Russia? So if Putin just turned off the taps, what happens?
Yeah, completely. I mean, they're begging. I don't want to name names, but somebody very, very, very respected that I was sitting down with this weekend said that they think that it's so dire that they think, and this is a little bit far out there, but they think Germany would be willing to leave NATO to team up with Russia because they need that energy. It's that dire over there. And this is someone who knows geopolitics pretty well. So I don't want to throw out names, but that's how dire it is. I mean, they need that energy. They have nowhere else to get it. I'm guessing, and I don't like to say this, but I'm guessing that we're going to see massive deaths this year from freezing to death. And it's not just freezing to death that we'll see this year, but then the natural gas is also needed to make fertilizer. But what do we need fertilizer for? Food. To make food. That's kind of important. And so, these are leading indicators, right? So if we don't have enough fertilizer today, that means next year we don't have enough food. And so this doesn't just get resolved magically overnight. So the energy crisis is massive. Europe is heavily dependent on Russia for their natural gas. And if Russia doesn't help them out, I mean, people are going to be freezing to death this year.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, isn't it?
And so then a lot of them might be willing to just hey, we're going to hold back, let Russia do what they do with Ukraine, because if we don't let Russia do what they do with Ukraine, then we're not going to get the energy that we need.
Yeah.
And same with China. I mean, if China wants to go against Taiwan, I mean, is the US going to stand up to them? I mean, Biden said that they would, but back to how dependent are we on China? We found out in March of 2020 that we can't even make PPE, which is ridiculous. But even more importantly, our antibiotics, 90% of our antibiotics come from China. But even worse, the big problem is all of our rare earth elements come from China, and we need those for our missile guidance systems, our submarines. So technically we couldn't even go to war with China because we don't even have the stuff that our military needs to go to war unless we get it from China.
If they turned off the taps.
If they turn off the taps. And so we might, that's why it looks like they're both signaling right now, like to each other, like, okay, you ready? We're going to go on 3 kind of a thing. And then the US is just going to have to just like sit back and like let it happen. So that's maybe the war that this fourth turning brings.
Yeah. I wonder how,
I hope it's not in the US. But
I hope it's not war. I mean, but I've given it a lot of thought, and I don't see how we go, at least in the next probably 8-10 years. I don't see how we get out of this.
Well, I have a scenario. I'll give you a scenario.
Yeah, I'd love to have some optimism here.
Yeah. So in my own biased optimism, the way that I think it could happen, I'm hopeful that it happens. I believe that obviously the world's trending towards totalitarianism, but using the history of cycles, it gives me a little bit of different picture. So obviously the world is trending towards centralization of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
I don't believe what breaks the grip of that or the trend of that is war. I believe what breaks the trend of that is competition. And so New York and California were competing to see who could be the strictest states. Texas and Florida outcompeted them. They stole all their businesses. They stole all the value creators, and both governors found themselves on the chopping block, right? That's like a small example. A bigger example is like what's going on in El Salvador right now today. And so if a nation like El Salvador says, hey, come down here, live free, come make as much money as you want, no mandates or whatever, a lot of people will go. And then the next state over, Nicaragua or Panama, is going to say, hey, well, us too, come here. And then Mexico, okay, here, how about us too? And when enough people leave, then the US or countries like that will be forced to compete. They'll be forced to relax their restrictions. And we know this to be true, again, through history. Look at China. So China was under Mao, became, the strict communist country. And they were, the last holdout of really strict communism, and they couldn't compete. They couldn't compete. And so what'd they do? They didn't go to war. They opened up free trade zones. They introduced capitalism to their country because they were forced to do that. And so I think we could get out of this without going to war. I think, the G7 continues to see this crackdown, this lockdown continues to tighten the screws on people. But because there's a safety valve, there's a place to go. People like you and I, we can just take our businesses anywhere we want. And so I can go to Nicaragua, El Salvador, or wherever it may be. And I think in a relatively short order of time, we could see massive change. And my optimistic viewpoint, I think by the end of the decade, we could really see the whole power structure shift. Because remember what I was saying before, when you look at the mega politics, it's always about when the power of balance, the balance of power shifts. It's always what shakes us up. And the balance of power is shifting right now. 2 things that are happening. One, the internet and this information age. So going back to the meme warfare, right? So if we go back to the 1500s, it was, as I started out saying before, right? When the printing press came out, it shifted the power of balance because now people had the information, right? The internet kind of gave us that. But the problem was the internet got very centralized. All of a sudden it got taken over by the FANGs, and the FANGs are now censoring us, right? So we almost kind of got there, but then it kind of got taken over. But it's still helping because today CNN is the #1 news station in the world, or at least in the United States. Anderson Cooper is the #1 show. He gets about 600,000 or 700,000 views.
I think Tucker Carlson has to get more than.
Or maybe
that doesn't matter. That it's not.
Maybe Tucker Carlson. But anyway, but just CNN though. But back to CNN, I was looking at their numbers. So yeah, Tucker probably gets more. But Anderson Cooper on CNN gets about 600,000 or 700,000 views. In the 25 to 45-year-old range, he gets about 100,000 views. You get more than that, George. I get more than that. You got Joe Rogan getting 200 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the internet has shifted that. We can see the emperor has no clothes. We can see that they're removing the dislike button because of Biden videos. Right. And so the internet has given it that, but because it was co-opted, we're not quite there. The next shift of power, the change in the balance of power it's Bitcoin. Because when I can store my wealth in a way that cannot be inflated away or stolen from me, you cannot come and take my wealth. Now, you can't underestimate what the government will do, and they have guns. I get all that. But what happens is when you have your wealth in real estate or the bank account or in gold, if I kill you, I can take all your wealth. If you kill me, you can't get my Bitcoin. So why would you kill me, right? And so by shifting that, it forces them to provide a value or good or service in exchange for your tax revenue. And it will force the nation state to look at you as a customer as opposed to a servant or a serf. And so it's all throughout history, it's when that power balance shifts. And that's what we're seeing right now. So it's the combination of one, competition, seeing countries like El Salvador start to have that competition. Red states, even in the US, I think are examples of that. And two, shifting that power balance. I think there's a way we get out of this without a war. The nation states that are going to continue to treat their people like subjects, like serfs, and they're going to continue to tax away, they're going to continue to decline. They're doing it to themselves. You know this. They're going to shut down their energy. They're going to shut down their ports. They're going to print the money supply, and they're going to crumble. Like left to their own, they're already crumbling. These other areas will open up. So that's my thesis.
So Puerto Rico has had the Act 60. It was 2022.
Right.
Since 2012 or 13, if my memory. I know I went there for that back in 2000, end of 13, I believe.
Yeah.
So they've had it for, let's just say, 7 years.
Yeah.
And this is a place where Americans can go that they have a business, or they make a lot of money in capital gains, and they can pay almost 0% tax.
Right.
0%. So you've got 350 million Americans. How many of them have gone to Puerto Rico?
Well, they're coming over by the boatload right now. I've been here for a year.
It seems like that. And I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
It seems like that because Puerto Rico is such a small place. But I mean, in reality, let's say, 10,000 people, something like that, maybe that much have gone over. And so, and that's giving them the ability to pay 0% tax. So if that's not going to pull enough people away from the United States to really move the needle, the reason why I would say that is because sure, you save money on taxes, but what is that really worth? How much money do you need to save? Like Puerto Rico isn't as nice as Miami. It's just not, right? But the infrastructure is a hell of a lot nicer than El Salvador.
Right. But I guess what the point I was going to make is that where you're living gets to a point where it's not worth it anymore. If you lived in New York City and they offered you zero tax, would you stay?
Well, I think,
of course you would. Like,
right. So they go, but they still go to the United States.
Right. But when and if supply chains start breaking down, you can't get products. The shelves are empty on the stores. Energy crisis. The prices are sky high. You're having intermittent blackouts on energy. Now they've closed the borders and they're forcing everyone to take the medicine like they're starting to do in Austria and some of these Australia. People are going to start leaving. And so I think the heat hasn't gotten hot enough yet, but give it 3 or 4 more years. And I think the heat's going to be hot enough and a lot of people are going to want to go somewhere.
Yeah. So I completely agree with that. I totally agree with that. I don't know that the majority will, but I think
the majority won't.
I think, and it's the same thing that you saw in East Germany with the Berlin Wall. The main reason they built that wall, this obviously is not what they told the citizens, but is because so many people were fleeing East Germany and going over to West Germany, and they're losing all of it's like a brain drain, basically. Right. So they had
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So they had to build that wall. So I think probably we'd see the same thing here in the United States, where if we did have such a brain drain going to these other countries, that adopted more free market principles and more sound money principles, then they would try to do whatever they could to prevent people from going, maybe get rid of their passport. I think that's why a wall is a bad idea.
Yeah, me too.
Usually it its purpose might be to keep others out, but usually it keeps us in.
Let's look at a couple things that are on the table real quickly, and let's see how high this heat could get. So, for example, the monetary supply increased 25% over the last year. Whatever you want to argue that, right? Somewhere in that range. I believe inflation, like Friedman says, it's a monetary phenomenon. So you increase the money supply, and it's not even across the board, but homes around Lake Travis and Austin went up 120% in the last year, right? It's different, right? But so I think that they're going to continue to increase the monetary supply by 25% a year. They they had that COP26 meeting in Glasgow a few weeks ago, the climate change meeting, and they want to spend between 150 to 176 trillion dollars to fight climate change over the next 30 years. That's between 5 to 6 trillion a year. It's more than the budget that we have today. So we're going to continue to see, in my opinion, we're going to continue to see printing, and we're going to continue to see inflation. At 25% a year, that starts to add up pretty quickly. What happens if it gets to 35 or 40% a year? So that's one. Then you add in, obviously, the supply chains. And a lot of supply chains are because of the monetary supply, but it's also because of bad policy choices, paying people not to work, forcing people to be shut their businesses down or quit their jobs. So you have all that. Then you have, on top of that, supposedly they're going to introduce new travel restrictions because of the whole, mandate thing. So then they lock people down. For a decade, I've been waiting for this day because of the wall keeps people in and out. I've been waiting for this day where if they build that wall, I think I'll probably leave before that wall shuts down. I asked people why they didn't leave Australia. So there's that. Then you look at Biden's new pick for the OCC. I'm sure you've probably done some stuff on that, Omarova, right? She's literally a communist from Russia, and she wants to get rid of all the banking. So we have individual accounts with the Fed. The Fed will then
digital currency just for people. Yeah.
Right. And then have the banks intervene in the stock market, long and short. And if you're spending too much, if inflation's too hot because I'm spending too much, or you're spending too much, they could take money out of our accounts.
Yeah, there's bail-ins for inflation. Yeah.
So we have that. And then you have, them talking about taxing unrealized gains. At what point does that heat get too high where you decide, when El Salvador says, hey, we may not have the same infrastructure, but you can live 100% free, no mandates. I mean, dude, it's a friggin' beautiful country. I've been there many times. So at some point the heat gets hot enough. And I think what we see already just over the next couple of years, that's enough heat for me. And I'm sure it's enough heat for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the good news is that there is going to be a brain drain. I wish it was a majority to get out of Dodge. You could have wished that about East Germany as well when they built the Berlin Wall. But I think it's going to be a significant amount of producers. That's for sure. What's it like in PR, just on a personal level? I've just, my past, my love-hate relationship with Puerto Rico. What's it like for you? Because you're out in Rincon, aren't you?
Yeah. So one thing that also gives me a little bit of hope is that even in Puerto Rico is a tiny little island. If you look at it on a map, it's about 3 hours to drive from one side to the other. It's not that tiny, but there's a mandate put into place in August. And so you have to show your papers. If you're in the city in San Juan, you have to show your papers anywhere you go. And I've been to the city a few times, and they're pretty strict about it. Like, show your papers. People just show them anything. They don't really seem to care what they're looking at, but as long as you show them something. But where I'm at on the west side of the island, I've never been asked once, ever. No one's ever asked. And I go to the beach, it's fine. I go to the gym, it's fine. I go to the restaurants, it's fine, which is, as long as I go to the gym and the beach and the restaurants, that's all I care about. I have my friends' houses, but I've never been asked once. And so that kind of shows, like, even in a small little controlled area like that, I don't know. It gives me a little bit of hope, I guess.
Yeah. And it just shows you that these politicians are all about theatrics, because in practice, this stuff, even if it works on paper, it doesn't work in practice at all.
And then when you start getting into countries like Mexico or El Salvador or Nicaragua, they're even worse off than Puerto Rico. There's no infrastructure. There's no way they can enforce that. Everyone doesn't have a smartphone. Like, there's just no way it would ever work there. And so, maybe in New York City, they can pull that off. But anyway, that's how Puerto Rico is. It's not so bad.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. What is the risk of them taking the power the government has usurped, not just in Puerto Rico, but more so I'm talking about these blue states in the U.S. And using that against the citizens in the future. And I'm not just talking about the next 6 months. I'm talking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, on your kids, your grandkids, etc. That's really my biggest concern with these mandates. I always tell people that I'm not really anti-medicine. I think it's each person should just have that discussion with their doctor. It's just kind of common sense. But what I am very anti are mandates, because especially when you look at 1905 Supreme Court decision with the smallpox, and then them using that as precedents to legalize eugenics in 1927 with Buck versus Bell. I think, wow, if these governments, if they're like de Blasio, if people are allowing them to come in and make it mandatory that you inject a foreign substance into your body just to have a job, and they're also doing that with 5-year-old or down to 5-year-olds. What will that justify? What type of precedents will that set in the decades to come? I'm sure you've given that some thought.
I'm giving a lot of thought, and actually, I decided to pull the trigger on writing a book, which is going to be the battle for the fate of humanity, because that's where I think we're at right now.
And that's that's not hyperbole.
That's the point that I think that we're in. I think the battle for the fate of humanity is going to be fought over the next 5 to 10 years, this decade. And it all goes back to this whole history of all these cycles, and then projecting where we're going forward. And I think history is a nonstop repeating cycle of freedom, oppression, revolution, freedom, oppression, revolution. It just repeats over and over and over. But I think that cycle that's happened since the beginning of time is going to end. And it's either going to end one of two ways. Either one, it ends with the totalitarian or authoritarians having all the technology they need to perfectly enslave us with their social distancing and their censorship and the central bank digital
credit score, AI,
all of that, and they could prevent another revolution from ever happening. I think that cycle could be broken, or we win here. We decentralize the government, decentralize the money, take away the source of their power, and no government ever gets that power again, and we stop the cycle that way. I think the cycle is going to be broken one way or another, and that's why I'm putting 100% of my time, my effort, and my focus to making sure we win.
How do other people help you? How do other people help push back against this authoritarianism?
So James Madison said it's all we need is men. We need to start small brush fires in the minds of men. Going back to that, quoting Solzhenitsyn, helped overthrow the USSR. He talks about how all it takes is for one person to, he said, push through the crust, to live in the truth. When other people see, wait a minute, he's not living in a lie, he's living the truth. I can do that as well. That's all that it takes. I've been in the mall, everyone's wearing a mask, I don't wear a mask, and someone walks by me and goes, well, wait a minute, you're not wearing a mask? Then I'm not wearing a mask either, right? And so it's about not complying. It's about living the truth. And that's contagious, and it's hard being that first person. I've been having this battle. I'm still part-time in California. We're going back to California next year. I don't think I told you, but when I was in Austin, when you were there, I bought a ranch.
Oh yeah. You showed me pictures of it. It's fantastic. Oh, yeah. So, it's not just a ranch, because that implies it's kind of like rustic. This thing is nice. Yeah. Like really, really nice.
But like, I want to stay in California, even though it's kind of a hellhole, but it's like, do I stay and fight and be that example of somebody living in the truth, or do I abandon it? And I think the answer that I've come up to myself is I'm going to stay and fight as long as I can. If they're going to lock me in my house, I'm not going to stay there, but like, I'm going to stay and I'm going to live in the truth, and I'm going to be an example as long as I can. So I think that's one way. The other way, and I guess the bigger piece of that is, my grandfather was a decorated World War II vet. My father was a Vietnam. He flew jets in Vietnam, and I grew up. He was still in the military when I was born. I thought I would just go to war one day. I just accepted that fact. I didn't, but I guess this is kind of our war, and it amazes me. Like my grandfather, like those boys were storming the beaches of Normandy, man, and their friends were dying right next to him. And today, people are afraid to speak up. Like you're afraid of saying something. And I know you're not, but to the average person, I would say, educate yourself, start brush fires in the minds of men, speak up, live in the truth, be an example. And then support other people that can. So for example, whenever I see lawsuits against, unconstitutional things, or there's lawsuits against the gym guy from New York, or the pastor from Canada, like I donate to those things, man. I don't want to be the guy going to jail, but I'll gladly put up money for their defense. And so I think that's another great way that people could do it as well.
Yeah. And I think this is the most exciting thing about Bitcoin. We'll just circle back to that because I know that's your favorite topic, or one of your favorite topics. I think that the idea of Bitcoin is so much more powerful than the price.
Yeah, well, the price is, yeah.
And that, if you can introduce someone to Bitcoin, maybe the way you introduce them is because the price has gone up, or because you've had massive gains in the last 2 years or something.
Yeah.
That's how you sink the hook.
Yeah.
But then you take them down the path of understanding the principles and the philosophy of Bitcoin. Yeah. And if they continue to go down that path, they come to one conclusion, and that's liberty, freedom, sound money, and free market capitalism. That's that brush fire you were talking about.
Yeah. And that's what happened to me after 2008. After I got wiped out in real estate, I had to go figure out what this whole financial casino was about. I became a gold bug, and gold also did the same thing to me. I realized that it was the money printer that was the problem, and became a gold bug. Then I just found out I'm a sound money advocate. But yeah, Bitcoin does that. It's like I said, throughout history, it shifts the power, the balance of power. Right. And, we've had plenty of conversations about that. A lot of people maybe have things they don't like about it. I just tell people, what, if not Bitcoin, then what? Because as of right now, there's no other option that we have to get that out of the hands of the government. I look at it like this, for anyone who's old enough to have seen the original Star Wars movie. The original Star Wars movie, they were fighting against the Empire. The rebels were fighting the Empire, and they had the Death Star. And when they went in to get the Death Star, they had to fly in, and they had to fly through that channel. And there was one spot that they had to hit. And when they blew that one piece up, Luke Skywalker blew it up, the Death Star fell apart and the whole empire crumbled, right? That one spot is the money printer. All the source of all the power, all the lockdowns, all the mandates, everything comes because they can print an unlimited amount of money. That's it. That's the one spot. If we can defeat that, and I know you're running a campaign to end the Fed, so you're doing the same thing, but if we can end the money, if we can blow up the money printer, the empire crumbles.
There you go. All right, Mark, we'll go ahead and leave it at that note, my friend. So for my viewers who want to find out more about what you do, where can they go check it out?
Well, first off, I'm going to have a monster presentation at your event, Rebel Capitalist Live. I'm fired up. I'm going to be on the same stage with Ron Paul. I'm going to bring the fire. I'm going to lay the rest of this thesis out for everybody. So make sure to come see me there for sure. And then you can just find me on YouTube, Mark Moss. I'm pretty active on Twitter, one Mark Moss as well. And I have a national syndicated radio show now.
Yeah. Talk about that. That's really exciting.
So, they sought me out. They were fans of the show. They gave me a radio show.
iHeartRadio, right?
iHeartRadio, yeah. It's nationally syndicated, so each individual radio station runs it on whatever network they're on, but you can find it on the iHeart website and stream it as well. But yeah, it started like 2 months ago, and it's been going really good. They're super excited about it, and it's growing. Stations are picking it up. And it goes back to kind of what you're saying is once they get that little bug, they just want to start learning about all this other stuff. And so while half the world is sleepwalking and it's scary, half the world's waking up, and it's encouraging. Yeah, so find me on iHeart, Mark Moss. Just search Mark Moss, you'll find me, and make sure to come to Rebel Capitalist Live.
All right, buddy. Have a good one. We'll see you in Houston.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hi, guys. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to the next Rebel Capitalist Live event. If you are a fan of the Rebel Capitalist show, I guarantee you will love the live event. The next one is Houston, where you can meet and listen to speakers, all your favorites from the Rebel Capitalist Show. People such as Dr. Ron Paul, Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, just to name a few. If you want to check out the rest of the speaker list and find out how you can attend, we'll put a link in the description below, or you can just go to rebelcapitalistlive.com. This is an event where you can learn to build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. But it's not just about building wealth. It's about increasing your freedom and networking with like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's an amazing event. I know you'll absolutely love it. Check out rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Houston.